Hi everyone and welcome to episode 118 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. Well, it doesn't feel like there's a hell of a lot of good news around in any facet at the moment, let alone the property market. But when you take into account things such as the conflict in the Middle East, obviously interest rates are pretty high. Finally, they've caught Desi Freeman, which is some positive news. But the cost of living, inflation, fuel prices and still the odd the home invasions. It's just quite a negative time at the moment around Victoria, particularly in Melbourne. But and Melbourne's property prices and property market is certainly not exempt from the negativity that's around at the moment. Although it does probably feel as though the property market's probably been a little bit flatter and down for a longer period of time. So if you are still looking to buy in the current market, there's some key considerations to take into account. And I thought we could go through some of those today. And probably one of the main ones is looking at your objectives and whether or not you're looking to buy an investment property or to buy a growth-focused asset, or perhaps is yield more important to you? Are you looking to upsize or downsize? And are you needing to buy or are you choosing to buy? And that can be two very different things as well. So there are a lot of key considerations before you leap into what is an uncertain property market at the moment. So let's have a look at some of the key points to consider. And probably the first one is really that asset selection and what is the purpose of your purchase. So are you buying an investment property? Are you buying a home? Or are you buying a lifestyle property? So perhaps a town base, or maybe you're looking to buy a tree change or a sea change type property for use on weekends. And so the key consideration here is make sure, doesn't matter if it's in an uncertain time or what have you, asset selection is always really important. So make sure the property that you're buying meets the brief and the intentions, and you don't get sidetracked on budgets and pricings and things like that. Understand what you're looking to buy and why, and make sure when you start looking that's what you're looking to do. So is it something that you're looking to add value to? So if that's the case, how are you going to add value? What are you going to do to the property? Is it going to be beneficial adding value to this type of property? Are you looking to upsize? So if your previous property is too small, you're looking to upgrade, make sure that the actual new upsize is actually going to achieve that. Sometimes people get caught up in, we really do like this house, but actually, is it going to give us the second or third living zone that we need? Or is it going to give us the extra bedroom or the ensuite? Make sure it's not just the superficial things that you're getting caught up in, and it's actually going to achieve your objective in terms of the upsize. Locations, is it going to make sure that, are you going to get what you need out of it? So are you actually closer to public transport? Are you going to be in the school zone that you need to be in? Make sure that the objectives around location are going to be met as well. If you're looking at a sea change type property, so from a beach point of view, some people really want to be within walking distance of the beach so that they don't need to use cars. Others find it more important to be closer to shops and things so that they don't need cars for that objective. So make sure that it's not just about we're in the township that we want to be in. Where do you want to be in that township? Make sure it achieves that objective as well. And if you're looking from an investment point of view, as I said before, make sure it's going to get the growth patterns that you want. Or is it going to get you the rental return that you need? Or are you going to be able to add value to then achieve the rental return that you need in order to be able to make your repayments and things? So there's a lot of things that need to be taken into account. And sometimes, particularly in an uncertain market at the moment, people get caught up in what might be perceived to be good value. And quite often, and I'll probably say this a few times during the podcast today, if something's cheap, it usually is for a reason, even in an uncertain market. So just be very careful around why you focus on certain properties. The next one's actually looking for the property and making sure you identify the right one. So once you've determined that objective, patience is really important in an uncertain market. I can't remember how many times I've heard clients over the years say to me, look, I really want to make sure I buy in a flat or a lower market or an uncertain market so that I'm in a prime position to purchase well. I also can't remember the first time a vendor ever said to me that I want to sell in a flat market. They just don't choose to. And so what tends to happen is that discretionary vendors sit on their hands and don't choose to sell. And so buyers in these flatter markets can sometimes get caught up in the eagerness to purchase something and something that's good value, and don't show the patience that's really needed in order to make sure that they get the right type of property. And that's really important. Doesn't matter, as I said before, whether it's an uncertain market or a flatter market or a dropping market. You need to make sure that you've got the patience to find the right property, so that you can differentiate between something that is actually good value or is cheap because the rest of the market isn't interested in it. Because in an uncertain market is also, and I'll say this again later on, but it's not the same as a flat or dropping market. There are still very much active sectors, and competition is definitely around for certain types of properties. So just because you may feel as though you're in the box seat to pick up something at good value doesn't mean you always will. Okay, so the next component is, once you've identified the property, is actually assessing its value, and make sure you do that the right way. And that's not easy in an uncertain time, as I said before, because there can be differing sectors, and you might go and look at an auction that might not be in the same type of property class that you're looking at, and it might be really active and there might be a lot of bidders, and then the next property you go to, there's no interest. So it can be really hard to determine where you need to push your value and push your limits. So it's really important to do your homework, as we always say. So make sure that you're looking at getting your technical value set up originally. So I've spoken a lot, and if you need to go back and look at previous podcasts about assessing value, but we talk about assessing technical value and then market sentiment. So when you're looking at technical value, it's the usual standard assets of a property that you need to take into consideration. So what's the location like? What's the land size? What's the orientation like when comparing it to other properties? The building style, obviously the size as well, but the style can come into play pretty significantly. Condition can be really important. Sometimes better condition is not always increasing the value of a property, particularly if someone's looking more for land value as opposed to something that's got improvements adding value. Parking for apartments can be really important. And they're the key characteristics that you should take into account. So what you need to do is obviously compare these to the subject property that you're looking at and see how they stack up. Now, given the movement in the Melbourne market in recent times, or lack of, I should say, sometimes we obviously with sales, you want to keep them as current as possible. But if you're struggling to get sales evidence at the moment, you're actually better off probably going a little bit further back and looking at older sales than you are than diversifying geographically. If you go a little bit further back, because the market hasn't changed drastically over the last few years, that can give you still a reasonably accurate reflection of what the properties are worth. Now, again, be very careful, because there's certain sectors where that might not be the case, particularly say in the sub 950 market, where there has been a bit more activity because of the first home deposit scheme that the federal government's got up. So there's other aspects to take into account, but there can certainly be technical value that can work into your favour. The next element, as I said before, is around the market sentiment side of things, and that's really important at the moment. And it's important to understand the sentiment within a particular type of property characteristic, because for that exact reason I just said before, if you're in an inner city apartment at the moment in an older style block, it's not flying and values changing week after week, but there is certainly more competition in that space than what there is perhaps in a family home in the $3 to $4 million market in some of Melbourne's eastern suburbs. So understanding the market sentiment for the particular type of property that you're considering is really important. You can gather that by looking at similar properties that are for sale at any particular time and seeing what the competition's like on those. Obviously, observing auctions is a really good starting point, because you can see the depth of interest. It's not just about the sale price, it's then about how many other parties are actually competing for that auction, the number of bidders at those auctions, and what's the value like in comparison to the original quote price. So are they jumping drastically above, or are they selling within the range, to give you a bit of an idea of where sentiment sits at any point in time. So that can give you a really good feel around interest levels. The next one is around setting realistic expectations. It's very common in what might be perceived to be a flatter market and not necessarily as active, for buyers to feel like they're in the box seat. And as though that they can dictate terms on any property that's for sale at any point in time. And obviously they want to buy it for as little as possible. Now, that is very much human nature. People do want to buy a property for as little as possible. But you need to still be prepared to pay a fair price. If you're not prepared to, it doesn't mean you will have to. You will certainly be hopefully putting yourself in a position to buy it at a better better spot. But you need to be prepared to do that, to put yourself in the right position. And using those value expectations that we spoke about in the previous segment, that will help you to set that up. But then you can go to an auction and then you feel as though you're in a strong position because you've got the knowledge to demonstrate that and to hopefully pick up the property at the best price possible. Now, buying the property is the next step. Now, we'll mostly look at auctions here today because that's predominantly what people will come up against in the sectors that we talk about. And obviously, I've done a number of podcasts over the years about bidding at auctions and things to take into account. So if you'd like more info, have a look back at some of those. But certainly, there's some key characteristics to take into account and key elements. So the auctioneer, they're going to determine what an acceptable bid is. So you can't come in there and think that you're going to, just because it's a flatter market, I'm going to dictate terms and I'm going to only give you small increments. They have the right to say no to any bid. So make sure that it's a reasonable bid and put yourself in a strong position to negotiate if needs be. If the property is passed in, which is obviously meaning that it doesn't reach the vendor's reserve price, if it's within your budget and you have an interest in buying that property, make sure that it passes into you. So that will give you the first right to negotiate at the vendor's reserve price, and it will put you in the strongest position. It doesn't mean that you have to pay the vendor's reserve price, but you've then got the opportunity to exclusively negotiate with the vendor at that price. Now, legally, if you reject that reserve price, then the agent and the auctioneer and the vendor can walk away. Now, most auctioneers and agents will negotiate in good faith with a buyer up until a point where they can come to an agreement, which is the ideal outcome for everyone, or where they get to a point where neither party is prepared to concede anymore and they agree that that's it, and then they can go and negotiate with other parties. That's typically how it will work. But bear in mind that from a legality perspective, they don't have to keep coming backwards and forwards. So it's really important to understand how that process is going to work. Put yourself in a strong position, get the property passed into you, and then go through the negotiation phase. Have your sales ready to go so that you know where the market sits and you can use those to your advantage. If you've had a building inspection done, know the ins and outs of that so that you can point out some of the faults and things that you may have to spend money on. And put yourself in a good position to be able to pick up the property at a strong level. So they're the main characteristics. There's a lot to it around uncertain times, and it can be quite uncomfortable for people, but you do need to have confidence. And if you pick the right type of property and you're confident in the value assessments that you've put on the property, don't be afraid to back yourself in and pay if you need to under competition. But also, if the competition's not there, then you're in the box seat to negotiate, and you can negotiate hard. Just don't be too cute and finesse things too much. Now, the case study for this week, I had an auction earlier this year in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Now, obviously, that's as we've been in fairly uncertain times for most of this year. It was a 2-bedroom apartment for an owner-occupier client of mine. They had a quote price of $750 to $825 on this one, and the auctioneer had told me prior to, or the agent that I'd been dealing with had told me prior to the campaign, that he only had probably 2 other parties and they weren't overly strong, and that the reserve was likely to be in the midpoint of the quoted range that he'd put forward. Now, this is a really good apartment, good off-street parking, a really attractive tree-lined street. Well maintained, had a great northerly aspect, off-street parking, all the things that you would really want. It was a great position in the block for an apartment of this type. And I turned up to the auction on the day. The numbers in attendance were very strong. There was around 50 to 60 people there, and the auctioneer opened the bidding on a vendor bid at the bottom of the quote, $750, and they had competition from the very start. And by the time I blinked, there was 5 people before I'd even had a chance to open my mouth that were bidding. So a lot more interest than what the agent had suggested to me, but his point around the reserve price was right. They declared it on the market at $800,000, so around the middle of the range. It started to draw to a close, and most of the bidders started to wind up around the $870, $880 mark, which is when I got involved. And with a few bids, we ended up buying the property for a bit over $900. So as I said, even in an uncertain time, there's still properties around that have got really good interest. And so if you are and if you believe too much about what an agent said, there's no chance I would have purchased that property for the client. But understanding value and why it was worth what it was, and why there was likely to be competition, as there always has been in this block, we were able to successfully purchase it, and the client was very happy. So that's it for episode 118 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. As always, please feel free to share the podcast far and wide, subscribe to all of our channels. And if you need further information, visit our website, wakeland.com.au, and we wish you all the best with your property decisions.